Hello, everyone, and welcome to Solve Climate by 2030. We're so glad that you all could join us here today. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that the University of Nebraska is a land-grant institution with campuses and programs on the past, present, and future homelands of the Pawnee, Ponca, Odo, Missouri, Omaha, Dakota, Lakota, Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Kaw peoples, as well as the relocated Ho-Chunk, Iowa, and Sac and Fox peoples. Please take a moment to consider the legacies of more than 150 years of displacement, violence, settlement, and survival that bring us together here today. At the University of Nebraska, we respect and seek out inclusion of differences, realizing that we can learn from each other, and we look forward to building long-lasting relationships with the Indigenous peoples of Nebraska. My name is Abby Schroeder. I'm a junior environmental studies student here at UNL, and I'm grateful to have been given the opportunity to organize this year's event on behalf of the environmental studies program, with the support of Dave Gosselin, Hillary Mason, and my fellow student ambassadors. Solve Climate by 2030 is part of Bard College's Worldwide Teach-In, which is a coordinated effort to empower meaningful, locally oriented, and fair solutions to climate change within the decade. This year, hundreds of universities, colleges, K-12 schools, and local communities are participating. Tonight's event is guided by the belief that climate change is simultaneously global and personal. Therefore, we have the opportunity and responsibility to be a part of the solution. Throughout the evening, you'll hear professors, professionals, and students discuss their perspectives on food systems, specifically related to climate change and social justice. The audience is encouraged to send in questions using the Q&A feature. We're now going to begin our first panel, the role of academia in food production and climate, focused on responses and solutions. So please welcome Dr. Sam Wortman from the Department of Agronomy and Horticulture and Tribal Extension Educator Ted Hibbeler. We're going to start off with some introductions. So Ted, if you want to begin by telling us title, emphasis area, and a brief summary of what you do and study at the university.
Sure. My name is Ted Hibbeler. I'm the Tribal Extension Educator for Nebraska Extension here at the University of Nebraska. I work with tribal communities here in Nebraska, creating food sustainability programs and reconnecting kind of the university with the University of Nebraska with the indigenous communities, both in the urban areas and with the reservation areas as well. I'm also a member of the Sichango Lakota Oyate, or the Rosebud Sioux tribe up in South Dakota. And I'm glad to be here, guys.
All right. Sam, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Sam Wortman, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Agronomy and Horticulture. And I study food production, and specifically fruits and vegetables. And I work with everybody from the home gardener scale up to the commercial producer who's selling fruits and vegetables at farmers markets and directly to restaurants, schools, hospitals in eastern Nebraska and beyond. And so I'm really excited to talk with you all today about how that intersects with climate change.
Great. Our first question is kind of a broad one. What does climate change mean to you? Either you can feel free to answer that one first.
Go ahead, Ted.
Okay, thanks, Sam. This is my interpretation of climate change. It is the Earth's, or in Lakota, Unshimaka. It is Unshimaka's reaction to what human beings are doing to her. You know, as the indigenous perspective is the Earth is a grandmother, and what we need to do is if we're not in a good relationship with her, then she's going to respond and react. And that's what she's doing right now, according to the indigenous worldview, is you've got the Earth reacting to what the humans are doing to her. And so I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks, Ted, for that perspective. Yeah, I mean, for me, Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think for me, climate change, when I think about climate change, I think about my kids, right? So I've got 3 young children, and so I think about their future and the uncertainty that climate change brings to their future, and probably mine as well. And so I think about ways that we can try to reduce some of that uncertainty, um, and adapt to it, I suppose.
How often do you engage in discussions or with media or other events related to climate change, either within or outside of your role at the university?
With me, I engage in these kind of conversations on a daily basis. And so I'm invited into meetings and presentations to kind of give the indigenous worldview on what's going on, not only with climate change, but with food sustainability, a lot of different things that are impacting what's going on with the earth. So I get into a lot of these discussions, and I see my role is to bring in the indigenous worldview regarding our relationship with the earth and with the plants and all living things here in this world. We have a kind of a different perspective on how we should be, what type of relationship we should be in with the earth and with the plants and with all living things, and it's cultural with us, it's historical with us, and it goes all the way back to our creation stories. And it's just the other day I was invited into a class, an environmental culture class with the environmental studies program, and was talking with a lot of non-Indigenous students about what influences them regarding their perspective on the environment. And they had a hard time figuring that out. And so I was talking to them with Indigenous people. It goes all the way back to our creation story on how we are to have a relationship, the type of relationship that we are to have with the earth and all living things. And it boils down to becoming a good relative to the earth and to all living things. So that's historical, that's cultural, and that's something that we are given throughout our oral histories throughout time. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, and for me, I don't explicitly have conversations about climate change on a daily basis, but yet we are talking about climate change every day, right? So teaching in agriculture, agronomy, and horticulture, we talk almost daily about things like drought and extreme heat and how that influences plants and the people growing them. And obviously those are directly related to the effects of climate change. So yeah, and as far as the media, I don't do a lot of media events, but when I think about it, the last couple that I've done have been related to climate change.
All right. So now that we've kind of talked about various perspectives on climate change, how are we seeing that climate change impact food systems in Nebraska?
Well, for me, since I've been here with the University of Nebraska, I haven't been here very long, but about 4 years now. So what I've seen is kind of an awakening of the need for local food production. And I know when the pandemic hit and shelves were bare and the trucks weren't coming in with the fresh produce because Nebraska imports 90% of its food. The emphasis really got on local food production then. And I've been involved in a couple of programs and projects working with tribal communities to develop those type of local food production programs. and working with the university as well in those areas as well. So I just see a bigger need. I see people more aware of the need for local food production. And so that's where, how I see it impacting the food systems here in Nebraska.
Yeah, I see kind of three main impacts of climate change on our food systems here. And because I work with fruit and vegetable crops, those are crops that have to be, that require a lot of human labor, particularly around harvest and planting. And so I see the biggest impacts really on people and the people who are doing that work, because it's often during the hottest months of the year when that work is done. And so when you have twice as many, extreme heat advisory days, that means that it's twice as dangerous for people to do that work outside, right? So that's probably top of the list for concerns that I have, is that it's just becoming more difficult for us to work in agriculture because of our climate. And related to that is just the variability in precipitation. And we've always dealt with drought, right? It comes and goes, but when we look at predictions, when I listen to our state climatologists talk about expected precipitation patterns, we expect that they're going to become more variable, right? So we're supposed to have higher intensity rainfall events further apart, right? So when it does rain, we're going to have more runoff, and that has environmental impacts in itself, because we're going to be taking sediment and nutrients with that runoff. And so we have to think about ways to better capture that rainfall and reduce that runoff and store that water in our soils and in reservoirs, because we're going to have to be prepared to go longer without the precipitation that we've traditionally gotten. So that's another thing I think about. And then, there's trade-offs, because the warming temperatures, particularly warming winter temperatures, actually means that we can grow some new crops, right? So strawberry is one that I work on that has gotten easier to grow over the last decade. That's a crop that we typically plant in the fall, and then we have to protect it from freezing temperatures. And so it has to survive that winter, but it's not a super cold hardy plant. And so we have better success growing strawberry in our current climate. And so that's a new opportunity for growers. But in the same hand, it's more challenging to grow other crops. And so spinach is a crop that doesn't like extreme heat, and so, but a very nutrient dense, water efficient plant. So it's a great crop, but it's now becoming a little bit more challenging for us to grow that. You have to plant it earlier and get it harvested sooner, because it will either die or bolt. And so there's trade-offs, right? So new crops emerge, others we need to sunset. And then we've got people here in our department doing great work on looking at stress, crop stress under different climate change scenarios. So one of the things we're most concerned about are warming nighttime temperatures that can really influence the physiology of crops. Some of our staple crops like corn and soybean and wheat, it can really reduce the yields of those plants because of some of the stress that it causes. And so trying to better understand that and improve plants to deal with that is an ongoing challenge, but it will have some big impacts on our food system.
What role do you think that higher education should play in this climate crisis and impending food systems crisis? And how does your specific position play into that?
I can go first. I think the University of Nebraska could work more closely with the indigenous communities here in Nebraska, as far as understanding our perspectives on relating to the earth and to the plants, and sustainability in general. That's kind of my role in this with the University of Nebraska, is getting for example, tribal councils to sit down with university administration to talk about creating partnerships to where there's reciprocal dialogue. Before, it's always been the university saying, well, this is what you need to do. And so I see my role is that the university needs to start listening to the indigenous communities and how we've been sustaining this land for thousands and thousands of years prior to colonization. And so it's just a matter of getting the administrators to kind of listen to what the tribal communities are saying regarding how they should take care of the earth, how we've been doing that for a number of years, and just opening up that reciprocal dialogue between the university and the tribal communities. The university is always talking about the Western science approach. That's pretty much what they know. And so they should be talking about it, like Sam is talking about it. But with us, we have our own indigenous science. And so the university needs to learn from us as well about our indigenous science is all about relationships. Relationships with the earth, relationships with the plants, with all living things. And I think we could open up some areas regarding that particular conversation and sit down with the university scientists and get them to start kind of get them to be more aware of the indigenous point of view regarding relationships. There's a reason why things are happening that aren't very good with the climate right now. Okay, you have all kinds of things going on throughout the world. And so one of the things, is you just got to look at, things that are broader in scope than just drought and just runoffs, but you have to understand what's causing these things. And that's the non-relationship that non-Indigenous people have with the earth. And so that relationship is almost non-existent because the earth is looked at as a resource, to make money from. It's a commodity. And that's just the opposite of what Indigenous people look at. We have a relationship just like we have with our human family, with the earth and with the plants and all other living things. In my language, we say Madakwe Oyasin, which means we are all related. And that means all living things. So if we can get scientists to start listening to us and start trying to understand what that means, that relationship, rather than just studying and making predictions, but rather teaching that relationship in higher education, then I think we could look at broader systemic issues that are going on throughout the world in a different perspective, and we could maybe have a better relationship with the earth and with the plants and what's going on with the earth now with climate change. So according to our indigenous elders, they're saying it's time for a cleansing. Okay. And so what we're doing to the earth, we're clear cutting trees, we're putting all kinds of chemicals on the land and in the water, in the air. I just read an article about a chemical spill up in the northeastern region. And it went into the river. The chemicals went into the river, so the water supply is now tainted, and they're having to drink bottled water. And it's that's not the only community that's happened with. It's happened in Michigan as well, and so forth and so on. And we're putting nitrates in the water and the soil here in Nebraska as well. So those are systemic issues that Indigenous people could sit down and teach about that relationship, that we should be taking care of this earth, and not destroying it. So, you know, I'm really, that's kind of what I see my role in as far as higher education as well. Is it's time to start listening to indigenous people regarding our relationship with the earth. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part. I'm glad that you brought that up, and I hope that we can hopefully see that happen within the future. But
Yeah, great points, Ted.
Sam?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that, I agree with what Ted's saying, and I would just add, for me, I see my niche or my role is I really try to push students to become innovators, because I think that's really what we need is innovative solutions for climate change, and so yeah, we want to teach students about the science of climate change and the systemic issues that Ted's talking about. But I really want to focus on solutions and getting students to think creatively about what those solutions might look like, and then really teaching them how to test those things, right? So how do you prototype an idea? How do you get customer feedback or stakeholder feedback in this case? How do you innovate in a way that's inclusive and includes all of these different perspectives like Ted's talking about and worldviews? And make solutions that work for everybody and not just a select few. So I really try to emphasize that in all the classes that I teach, is give students the resources and the space to create new solutions and test them.
All right, so one of the last things we have is, what is one thing that you feel the audience should take away from this panel?
I'll go first, Sam. So, you know, just what I said previously is that there's more than one way to look at how we relate to the natural world, okay? And Western science has been in charge of that for, here in this country, for about 500 years. You know, so, you know, I think what Sam was saying earlier, you know, he's talking about alternative methods of dealing with climate change. And I think it's time for countries to start looking at indigenous perspectives on how we relate to the world, how we related to the natural world, and how we still relate to the natural world regarding caretaking of this earth and all living things. And that's something that, you know, like I said earlier, comes directly from our culture and our histories. And, you know, our worldviews are shaped throughout time. And, you know, as far as this particular country, the United States, you know, the indigenous people have been here for thousands and thousands of years. We're not going anywhere. We're still here. And we still have those traditional indigenous worldviews regarding our relationship with the earth and with all living things. And so if you want to take anything away from my conversation, you know, it would be just that, is, you know, it's time for not only the university, but, you know, other, you know, states, counties, whatever, to sit down with indigenous people and learn from us as far as how to take care of this earth, you know, because right now it's not looking real good, you know, as far as what's happening with everything that's going on, and how, you know, colonization, here I go again, but colonization created this commodity economy where everything's for sale. And if we can make a buck off the earth, we're going to do it. If we're going to drill for oil, or if we're going to, whatever we're going to do, we're going to do it. And, you know, we don't care what happens to the earth, you know, and consequently, this is our home, people. Okay. So it's like, why wouldn't you take care of this home? You know, why are you polluting it? Why are you clear cutting trees? Why are you all of this stuff. And that's just my indigenous perspective is, the earth is our home. She's our mother. So why are we doing what we're doing to it? Okay. It doesn't make sense just because corporations want to make money. And so that's the other thing is that when I talk about systemic review of how we're dealing with the natural world, it has to be that way. We can't nickel and dime these things. Our students you guys need to be aware of these global things that need to happen. And those global things have to be a change of perspective on how we deal with this earth. And we have to look at indigenous worldviews regarding that. There's a reason why the earth was in such pristine conditions when the colonizers came over here 500 years ago. They didn't think anybody lived here because we had this, North America and South America was in such pristine condition. We knew how to coexist with the natural world. And so I think those kind of things, those kind of perspectives, if you're going to walk away from my discussion, then walk away with that, please, and start thinking about indigenous perspectives on solutions to climate change. Thank you. Wopala, thank you.
Thank you very much for your perspective. Sam, is there anything else that you want to have our attendees remember from this session?
Yeah, I guess I would just close by saying that, if you're interested in making impacts and headway in this, climate fight, I would say food systems is the place to do it, right? Food systems account for some of the largest shares of greenhouse gas emissions and also are impacted most by the effects of climate change, right? So our food system is on both ends of this issue. And so there's in my humble opinion, there's no better place to work on solutions that impact people beyond the food system. So that's what excites me every day is coming to work on what those solutions look like from the production aspect. And so encourage you to think about that.
Thank you guys both very much. I don't think we have enough time for any audience questions for this session, but I'll remind you guys to keep asking them just in case we do have any in the future. But thank you to both Sam and Ted very much. I think that was a very good start to our discussion for tonight. Our next panel will be on community involvement with panelists from members of the community. So our next panel explores the impact of community organizations can have. Our community involvement panel features leaders who work with our local communities every day. They offer a very important perspective on current and future food production and on food security here in Lincoln. So please welcome Michaela Kumke of the Food Bank of Lincoln, Dr. Megan McGuffey of Community Crops, and Tim Rinna from Holly Hamlet. Like the previous session, we're going to start off with some introductions. So Michaela, do you want to start us off?
You bet. Good evening. My name is Michaela Kumke, President and CEO at the Food Bank of Lincoln. Food Bank of Lincoln serves 16 counties in Southeast Nebraska. We're a member of the Feeding America network, which serves all 50 states and Puerto Rico.
All right, Megan, do you want to introduce yourself and what you do?
Sure. Hi, everyone. And I have a sick kiddo with me, so sorry for any background noise, but I'm Megan McGuffey. I am the program coordinator of Community Crops, and we are an organization that helps people grow local food. We manage community gardens, urban farms, and do a lot of education and advocacy around those issues. So glad to be here.
And Tim, do you want to finish?
Sure. Thanks, Abigail. I'm Tim Rinna. I am the co-founder of the Holly Hamlet Neighborhood Garden in Lincoln, Nebraska. About 13 years ago, we decided that climate change was going to have a pretty serious impact on our food supply, and wondered if there was anything that we could do to kind of grow some of our own food in the city, which is effectively a food desert. And over the past 13 years, we have gone from one measly tomato plot in our block to the equivalent of 80 yards of the Memorial Stadium football field in a block that has no vacant lots in it. This is people giving up their useless lawns to actually grow food. And because of our efforts, we have now won our first national award. And what did we win our award for? For growing some food in our yards and for meeting our neighbors. That's the stuff of national awards nowadays, folks. We have a lot of work to do.
Well, congratulations on your award. Our first question will be, what connections do you see between climate change / sustainability, and how does that translate to food security? Michaela, you can go first if you'd like.
Okay. Connections simply, and then the two other panelists who are far smarter than me can add their perspectives, but just making sure that we're growing food, and enough of the right food, and doing it in a reasonable and responsible way. I think the need, when I think about food insecurity, is generally greater than most people think or know. Just here in Nebraska alone, the number of food insecure neighbors would fill Memorial Stadium more than 2 times. The number of food insecure children just in the Food Bank of Lincoln service area would be a sellout crowd at Pinnacle Bank Arena. And so when you think about attending events at those venues and thinking now that those are neighbors, you know, those fans and seats, if you thought of them as neighbors facing hunger, the connection between climate and sustainable food sourcing is just a matter of fact, great need.
Well, I had no idea on those statistics about filling Memorial Stadium and PBA. That's a lot to think about. I think it really puts it in perspective. Megan, where do you see connections between climate change and food security?
Yeah, Michaela made some great points. And for me, I think that, you know, climate change is so tied to agriculture in so many ways. Agriculture is one of the biggest contributors to climate change. And it's also going to be one of the biggest victims of it. And when I think of our community being sustainable, being resilient, I think that we have to think about our food supply as a critical piece of infrastructure. And so if we don't plan for a future where there's going to be more extreme weather events, where our food supply chain is going to be disrupted, then there's going to be a lot of people going hungry in Lincoln. So agriculture can be part of the solution. It's also going to be deeply affected by these issues. So we just have to really work together to build sustainable communities in this future.
And Tim, finally, where do you see those connections happening?
Well, I'm now 67 years old, and I didn't pay any attention to these issues until I was 53. So that means that for better than the first half century of my life, all I did was eat. I had no idea where my food came from. I didn't care where my food came from. I wanted it to be ample. I wanted it to be safe, but that was the extent of my interest. And also I wanted it to be something I wanted to eat. No, I don't want to eat Italian tonight. Let's eat Mexican. We had Italian last night. All right, and so forth. That was the extent of my interest in all of this. Then it was because of my interest in climate change that I discovered that climate change was going to have an impact on the security of our food supply. Just not in the sense of, will I have enough for my next meal, but do we have a secure food supply that we can count on? So right now, for example, as Ted in the last panel talked about, 90% of the food that people in Lincoln eat comes from outside the state. We're an agricultural powerhouse. We brag about being the breadbasket of the world, and yet 90% of the food that we want to eat has to come from somewhere else. The average bite of food that we eat, according to a Pentagon study in 1969, which was over half a century ago, was that the average bite of food that we put in our mouth travels 1,346 miles to get there. Today, that number is closer to 2,000 miles, every single bite we eat. And then here's the thing, in the city of Lincoln, we need 1.5 million pounds of food every day being shipped into our city so that we have enough for the 3 meals that we want to eat and that bedtime snack before we go to bed at night. We need 1.5 million pounds of food shipped in every day. We're part of a global food system nowadays, and we're dependent on what happens on the outside. Well, what happens if those trucks don't make it in? What are we going to do then? Humans, particularly Americans today, think that our role in the food system is to eat. If you live in the city, you think that your job is to eat. I'm a consumer. That's all I do. We're going to have to shift that perspective. Climate change is not going to let us get away with that any longer. We have been literally on a gravy train, and we have got to start putting food in the center of our lives and start thinking about what it is we eat. Is it appropriate that we eat this? And is there a role that I can play in producing some of this food so that's one less mouthful that has to be shipped into Lincoln every single day? Climate change is going to upend the way that we look at the world and the way that we look at dinner.
Wow, I had no idea that 90% of our food comes from outside of Lincoln. Definitely terms for looking at our solutions. How do these connections between climate change and food security impact human health, whether that be physical, mental, all realms of health? Michaela, do you want to start?
Sure. Access to affordable and nutritious food is a hot topic for us at the food bank and a major focus. Making sure that every neighbor, regardless of economic situation, can access healthy food, because it's the baseline for how you're able to perform in school, how you're able to perform in your workplace, for your community. And so that's a major undertaking when you think about the stats that Tim has shared, and I know Megan has a wealth of knowledge in this area as well. But just thinking about that fundamental need, right? Access to food, but not just calorie dense food, healthy food. And we see that play out in, there are examples of when healthy food access is limited, we start to see changes in crime or desperation. And for a vibrant community, it all goes back to those basics. And so even there's a foundation here in town called Community Health Endowment. They do an annual study called Place Matters. And in one of their most recent reports, it demonstrated that on average, people who live in North Lincoln compared to South Lincoln, where the access to healthy food is more limited in North Lincoln, the average lifespan is about 15 years less than our neighbors who live in South Lincoln. And the answer to that, of course, is not that we all just pack up and move to South Lincoln. That would not be reasonable, and it wouldn't be the answer. And so we continue through different programs and partnerships to explore how do we go into neighborhoods and get more healthy foods there. And of course, how the climate plays into that is a significant factor. And a lot of it has to do with gardens and partnerships. And this is where I would turn over to Megan and her expertise.
Thank you. Yeah, those are super important points. And I would say, our time in nature, our connection to our food has so many impacts. Michaela highlighted some really important ones. It's physical health, but it's also really mental health. And so she mentioned some things, but additionally, I would just add, can you practice your culture and your family traditions? That's super important. Or is there like a healing value to time in nature, to knowing that we can go outside and have it be a pleasant experience at least most of the year. So I think those things all weigh in, and food security is a huge part of it, because our food does influence how we feel, both in a direct physical health way, but also just in like the quality of life that we have. And so I think that's really critical. And I think that's a huge myth to bust for people. I think sometimes folks assume that people eat unhealthy because they don't know better or because they don't care. But a lot of times that's actually a structural thing that is forced upon people when they don't have the resources, because the healthiest foods are the most expensive and the most perishable. So if you're dealing with other challenges, that just becomes that much harder. So I think this is a really critical issue to look into the future, and it's only going to become more challenging without really innovative solutions.
Okay. I don't really have a whole lot to add to what Michaela and Megan said. They pretty much covered it. And here's the thing, folks, is if you're not the constituency or the population that Michaela is addressing on a daily basis, the people that don't know where their food is coming from, you don't think about our food supply. You don't even think about food insecurity. That's a problem of poor people. That's a problem of hungry people, okay? But I'm not poor, I'm not hungry, so it's not my problem. There's just no awareness now under the global food system about how fragile our entire food system is, so that if the transportation system does break down, all of a sudden, we don't have food on our shelves any longer. Here in the hamlet, we have had neighbors garden with us, and in the hamlet, this is different from a community garden. It's a neighborhood garden. It's for the people that actually live here. We don't want people to have to get on a bike or get in a car to go to their garden plot. We want them to be able to walk out their back door or walk out their front door and be able to garden and eat what they have grown and so forth. But most people don't look at it that way. They don't even care about this whole issue. They don't realize that our food system at this point is insecure. We got an inkling of that with COVID-19. All of a sudden, things weren't on the grocery store shelves the way that they used to be. We should take that as a teachable moment here to make it personally instructive that we need to start thinking about how we can relocalize our food supply and start growing our own food again. When my parents grew up on farms in southeastern Nebraska during the Great Depression, 90% of what they ate came from within 5 miles of where they lived. All right. Today, 90% of our food comes from the global food market. That's not going to work any longer. And I can guarantee you that you do not want to wake up tomorrow morning and do not have food to eat. Nobody wants to go hungry for 24 hours. Nobody wants to go hungry for 48 hours. But if you got people going hungry for 72 hours, you are going to have the breakdown of human civilization as we know it. That's not a place we want to go. People don't think that there's a food insecurity problem in Lincoln. They think that it's all on the shelves, but that world is not. That world is on the verge of being gone forever. We're going to have to start pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps and start growing some of our own food, the stuff that we can grow.
Those are all extremely informative and insightful takes on this complex issue that we're dealing with. After hearing all of those connections and impacts that we see, what do you guys think meaningful improvement would look like in regard to local food security? What can we do as a community to support that?
I could kick this one off if that's all right. Yeah, I think really a lot of it comes back to what Tim's been touching on. If we can relocalize even part of our food supply, it's not like we're trying to replace the global food system overnight. That's not really a possible goal. But really what you're looking for is building community resilience, and that's about building redundancy into a system. So if a larger percentage of our food supply is coming from our neighbors and our friends and our own backyards, then when you do have, a drought in California or a global pandemic, we have a little bit more supply so that the impacts aren't so immediate and intense on us, and we're not feeding into that system. So, and so many wonderful things and possibilities can come from that, but that's a really basic starting point. So just getting, whether it's more people growing food for themselves or in community gardens, or that's changing your buying habits when you can to buy more from local producers. And even if you don't have a huge budget, you can talk to the institutions you care about and let them know it's important to you that they source local, and that can be really influential, just kind of raising awareness. And then again, just like getting the word out there, helping people understand these issues. The emergency management world talks about the average American city has a 3-day supply of food. Like, that's a pretty intense statistic, and it doesn't come from the local food world. It comes from the people who plan for disasters. So I think just getting the knowledge out there amongst your own friends and family, and then doing what you can, whether it's growing some of your own food in a windowsill, in your yard, in a garden, or supporting those that can grow local food, can make a big difference.
And I would say that part of what Megan just said, if you can do something, then do something, because not everybody is in a position. Growing food, canning, or other preservation is very time intensive. And a lot of the folks, the neighbors that we serve at the food bank, don't necessarily have the same luxury of time as our neighbors who are middle class or wealthy. And so it's not feasible for everybody immediately. Now, there are practices and there's education that happens that makes it possible. But it's not, as Megan said, it can't happen immediately. This has to be a steady support of resources and knowledge, learning, transferring that information. So I think that's really important too, that we don't have unrealistic expectations. Not everybody can start at the same place, but everybody can start. And there's value in that. Thinking too about the types of foods, and then what do we do to reduce the waste? When Tim is talking about all these tomatoes, and anybody who's ever grown their own garden, a harvest can be hit or miss, but tomatoes, usually in Nebraska, you're going to get a lot of them. And so then what do you do with it? How do we work together to make sure that we reduce the waste? And there are great programs and partnerships happening in our community to facilitate those connections. And I think Megan and Tim would both agree too that we can continue to do better work and strengthening those relationships so that we're not stepping on toes, but really giving really good information, and making sure that those who are experts in certain areas. I am not a garden expert. Megan knows this. I'm a backyard farmer, and her area is an expertise of it, and Tim's knowledge is strong. So it's looking to people who have the information so that we can send people to the right sources to get good information and get things going and growing to support what we can do and what we need to help meet these needs.
Michaela just said some really nice things about what a great gardener I am and so forth. She's wrong. I'm not. Okay. I mean, at age 53, I had to take a class from Community Crops on seed planting because they didn't know how to plant a seed. I had a tomato patch in my yard. Okay. That was like 10 by 10 feet. All right. But I never had to start a plant from seed. I would just go to the nursery and buy some, tomato sets or some pepper sets and stick them in my tomato plot, and that's all I would do. When it came to actually figuring out how to grow stuff, I had to take a class on it. All right. Now, inside an hour and a half, I figured out how to plant a seed. So it isn't like it took, 4 years of college to be able to do such a thing. But the key, and Michaela said this, is everybody needs to start where you are at. And that can mean everything from whether or not you tear up some grass in your yard to plant a garden for the first time in your life, or if you change your diet and decide that you don't have to eat meat 21 times a week. Okay, maybe you're going to let your meat consumption, which is really high in terms of its greenhouse gas emissions, you're going to eat meat like a treat, maybe like 4 times a week, something like this. A couple of years ago, we had some Rwandan students from the university volunteering in the hamlet. They thought that, wow, there's a place in the city of Lincoln where people actually grow food in their block. I'd be interested in seeing that. So they came over and we were chatting about what they ate. Well, it turns out that they eat sorghum and they ate millet, all right? And it was a pretty basic diet. And so I asked them, you know, how often do you eat meat? And they kind of looked at me with big eyes and they said, well, you know, not really very often. So I went and I did some research. The average Rwandan eats 22 pounds of meat a year. The average American eats 222 pounds of meat a year. And believe me, we are not growing those cows. We are not growing that sheep. We are not growing that pig in the city. That's food that's all being shipped in. We can choose as consumers to eat more of a plant-based diet and to eat in season, all right? And as a grower, we can try to grow some of our own lettuce. We can try to grow some of our own peppers. We can try to grow some of our own tomatoes. We can try to grow some of our own beets. We can try to grow some of our own green beans. We can grow the fresh items, and we can do it better than anybody else on earth, because if it's picked from our garden, it's fresher than anywhere else you can get it. It's as healthy as it can possibly be. It's the most nutritious food that you could possibly be getting, and it's coming from your yard or your windowsill or from your balcony and patio. All right, how will we know if we've made an improvement on all of this? Right now, Megan and I co-chair the Mayor of Lincoln's committee. It's called the Community Committee on Local Food. And right now we are working on a plan to figure out how Lincoln can start relocalizing its food supply. What we need to do more than anything, folks, is start modeling our behavior for others to see. Until age 53, I'd never even thought about growing a garden in my own yard. Why would I? Nobody else was. Nobody told me I should. Well, tonight, everybody's hearing how important local food is. You can't use ignorance as an excuse any longer. Show other people what they can be doing. Start growing some food in a public way. Start changing your diet and modeling good, nutritional, and environmentally responsible eating habits. Do all of that stuff. Start the process now. You can do it. And here's the thing. We can either start doing it in advance now and preparing, or face shortages as we go forward in the future. So the best course of action is to start preparing now and learning how to do this stuff before it becomes a climate emergency, because it's going to become a climate emergency.
Thank you all so much for your responses. Do you guys have any last thoughts or anything that you want to share with the attendees? Or otherwise, it looks like we've got one. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I would just add, I think the thing we haven't touched on as much is the role of policy. And I think that's important not to forget. We can all act individually, and that's really critical, but we can also influence these issues at a systems level, because they are system problems. And that, I always like to think of it as like big P and little p, right? Like big P is like you're talking to your elected representative, you're trying to get them to influence policies to be more supportive of local agriculture, to incentivize a sustainable agriculture, climate smart ag. But little p is like things that you can control. So maybe you have a student club at school and you can say, hey, we're going to buy our snacks and our meals from restaurants and businesses that are purchasing from local farmers. Or maybe you're going to talk to your cafeteria program and see what it would take to see them sourcing more locally, or from more sustainable sources. So there's a lot that can be done in the policy realm, and Michaela knows much more than I do about the food security angle and making sure we make sure everyone in Lincoln has access to that healthy, fresh local food. But I think we shouldn't neglect policy. Individual action is really important, but policy is how we can really change this at a big level.
Yep, and then I'll just add to that, if you don't understand policy as a way to get involved, come out and volunteer at the food bank. Go volunteer at community crops. Get your hands in the dirt, or in the mix, so that you can get a closer perspective of the work that is happening, to make it be real for you. Tim said earlier, maybe some of you are food insecure today. The statistics would indicate that is true. And so maybe you have a great awareness of these topics. But if that is not your experience, then understand that others do have very different life experiences. And if this sense of urgency doesn't feel so immediate to you or doesn't seem that real, try getting to a place where you can look at it from a different angle and see what it really, how it affects other neighbors outside of your own experience or your own circle. Because then I think you're more inclined to get involved when you understand how very real it is.
And I guess in conclusion, what I would say, I mean, I second everything that the two women just mentioned. What happened to me at age 53, when I realized that climate change was going to lead to food insecurity and that we couldn't live the way that we had been living. We would have to change things. I quit taking my food for granted. You know, I'd never thought about it before. If I was hungry, I went to the store, all right? Or I went, you know, I went out to a restaurant. But that's the extent of it. It was all based on taste. I was a foodie, okay? I would talk about restaurants, but I never really talked about where the food came from and who got it to me and how did that happen and is it going to be able to continue that way in the future? That was never part of the equation. What I would have you think about is that you should never look at your plate in the same way ever again. Every time you eat something, you should ask yourself, where did that food come from? And one of the best things you can learn, in addition to doing all the policy work that Megan and Michaela were suggesting, is plant some food and find out how much work it is and find out how uncertain it is. Okay, I mean, one of the scariest words that a gardener can ever hear is the expression garden failure. Is they planted something and it didn't grow, or you planted something and it grew for a while and then it died. What if that was your food supply? What if that's what you were relying on to be able to eat next month or whatever? This is an opportunity for us to never take our food for granted again. And folks, we need to start thinking this way because the food is not always going to be on the grocery store aisle shelves to the same extent that it is now. It's going to change. When we have climate that is going to be 4 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit hotter by 2050 than it is on average now, that's not a world that your plants want to grow in any more than you and I want to be out in the sun in. The world is going to change. You have an opportunity now to start learning how to do this stuff, to model for your neighbors. And in the process, if you're growing food in your yard, you're going to meet your neighbors. They're going to stop by and say, wow, what are you doing? Talk with me about this. And all of a sudden, you've made a new friend. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. The Holly Hamlet is where we talk about meeting our neighbors and growing some of our own food. Stop over anytime. We'd love to have you visit.
Thank you to all three of our panelists for a great discussion. I think they brought up a lot of really good and insightful points about food security and production, especially making it local to Lincoln. Before our final panel, I'd like to thank everyone for spending the evening with us, panelists and participants. Our final panel is going to be made up of current UNL students. Current students have been given the unique challenge to lead our planet to a cleaner and more equitable future. These panelists are made up of current students, and they're all involved with food security or with sustainability through campus and community involvement, through leadership, and through their academic studies. And they've already begun to lead us to a brighter future. So please welcome Caitlin Richards, Sammy Smith, and Shelby Saratella. Once again, we're going to begin with some brief introductions. They're each going to tell you their name, their major or area of study, and what they're involved in here on campus or in the community, and then a brief summary of their ideal career field. So Does anyone feel like going first or?
Yeah, I can go ahead and go first. So hi, my name is Shelby Saratella. I am a senior environmental studies major here at UNL. I'm currently working on my thesis, which is researching two-eyed seeing or indigenous knowledge systems and Western knowledge systems in Lincoln, Nebraska. As for my involvement on campus, I've been involved with the Environmental Sustainability Committee, the Freshman Leadership Program. I've helped to plant Earthstock before. And my career goals, my end goal is to work for the United Nations. I think that it is a really great opportunity to combine my passion for climate and the environment as well as the policy side of things. So hopefully to combine all them together and be a really put all my interests to use.
Awesome. I can go next. My name is Caitlin Richards. I'm a second year student majoring in environmental studies and fisheries and wildlife. And then outside of my major, I'm involved with a whole bunch of stuff like Casimir Student Advisory Board, the Care Peer Educator program, SDG Scholars program, as well as the honors program and some volunteer positions within Big Red Resilience and Wellbeing. Those volunteer positions include REACH suicide prevention training and then also Husker Pantry. In terms of food insecurity, climate justice, all that good stuff, my work within the pantry and then SDG scholars have taught me a lot about the scope of the issue and how I can play a role in this situation. And then I guess future career path, I'd love to get into like either research or work for like an NGO because I feel like that's the best way that I can make a difference while satisfying my career interests.
I'll go ahead and introduce myself as well. My name is Sammy Smith. I am a second year graduate student studying speech language pathology. I am currently involved in the Husker Pantry. I'm the graduate assistant over on East Campus. So if you ever pop in, feel free to say hi. My dream career is to be a speech language pathologist, ideally working with kiddos and hopefully one day getting a PhD and getting to do research related to speech therapy.
Great. So our first question is, as a student and a part of a younger generation, what do you consider when thinking about climate change and or food security and its solutions? So do you consider like who's impacted, which systems, do you have personal experiences, anything like that?
All right, I can go ahead and start it off. So like, as you mentioned, you know, who do I think about when I think about climate change and food insecurity? I do tend to think a lot about the younger generations when I think about this, just because we're the ones that are going to have to deal with this in the future. We're going to have to come up with creative solutions to try to work and fix what's been going on. As for personal experiences, I'm actually not from Nebraska, I'm from Wisconsin. So I've had a lot of experiences. I grew up by Lake Michigan. There's a lot of really interesting things happening there in regards to climate change. We have houses falling into the water in Lake Michigan. So it's kind of, close to home. The impacts of climate change are being felt already. I also tend to think a lot about people who have not had they haven't impacted, they haven't created much of climate change, but they're the ones that feel the most of the effects. They feel the brunt of climate change. And the people who are most responsible for climate change, they often don't feel as much of the impacts. So I just think it's unfair. And I tend to think a lot about that, just, how us as a younger generation, how we can solve this and make it more equitable for everybody here.
Kind of going off what you said, I definitely agree, being up and coming professionals and realizing that a lot of the things that are happening now that we maybe can't enact a whole lot of change in, especially when thinking of policy and things like that, just because we're not in that position quite yet. but a lot of those things that are changing are things that we're going to have to come up with solutions for, like you mentioned, and even the generations after us who are going to have to kind of come in and help clean up whatever's left over. And I think I also am not from Nebraska. I'm from St. Louis. So I grew up in Missouri, which is very close to Nebraska and very similar to Nebraska in a lot of ways. But I grew up in an area where we did have a really large food insecure population. And I dealt with that a lot as well. And one of the things that I think about whenever thinking about food insecurity too is thinking, like, even with the Husker Pantry, if something's happening with the crops and we're not getting a lot of fresh produce, what we get at our pantry that goes to students who maybe can't afford to buy fresh produce all the time, they're not going to get that because we get donations based on, like, hey, we have this left over and we're able to give it. So those people who maybe can't afford to go to the store and spend a bunch of money on fresh produce, that may be something that they get a lot less frequently than those who can afford it. And that can be something that if you've never been through that situation, it can kind of be hard to think of. But I definitely think it's really important, especially when thinking about accessibility for everybody.
No, I can finish it off. So in terms of like the different parts of the question, I'm more focused on like the who is impacted. Definitely, like we've mentioned, like Indigenous perspectives, diverse groups. So one group that I kind of want to talk about is, so this summer, I'll actually be doing research on how climate change impacts disabled persons. And so like, if we think about it, like in an extreme event, such as like a hurricane, which obviously we don't get here in Nebraska, but that's just my example. People who have mobility issues, they might not be able to evacuate as easily as people who don't have those disabilities. People who require assistive hearing devices or closed captioning. If a news service doesn't provide that for them, they might not have the most up-to-date information. So I guess how that kind of relates to Nebraska is we do face floodings, we face heat waves, droughts, and much more, like any type of severe weather, we get it here. And then of course, this impacts this food supply. I'm from Iowa, so I guess we're all out-of-staters, which is kind of cool. And we faced the derecho in summer of 2020, and seeing how we lost power for days, and thinking about how people may not have had the access to like keeping their food in the refrigerator because they didn't have a generator, or the service workers weren't able to like fix their power in time. That was a lot of food spoilage, a lot of food waste. So that definitely impacts the food supply. And then, sorry, just kind of got off on a little tangent there. And then also in terms of like disabled people, 1,300 deaths in the United States happen every year because of like heat waves, heat strokes, stuff like that. And disabled people are more likely to face this challenge. So that's why it's definitely important in terms of like accessibility when thinking about solutions, like thinking about those diverse perspectives. Like each climate plan isn't a one size fits all. So we need to include as many voices as we possibly can, because ultimately people are more impacted than other people. So
those were all great responses. My next question is going to be, does your identity as a student or part of a younger generation influence these considerations? It sounded like it does for a lot of you. Does anyone else have anything more to say off of that, or?
I mean, like I said before, I tend to think a lot about the younger generation when I think about climate change. So I think that's really been impacted by my identity as, you know, currently a member of the younger generation and as a current student. And I, like Sammy mentioned before, I also think about, you know, the people that are going to come after us. So I think, you know, I tend to think of ourselves as the younger generation right now, but there's still people coming after us. So it's, you know, it's up to all of us. But definitely being a student, definitely seeing all the impacts, you know, caused by people that have come before us. I think it's really impacted my view on climate change and climate justice and the way in which we can fix it. Like Sammy mentioned before, because there's not a lot of us that are in positions of power right now or in the legislature that are able to actually make policy to address this issue and solve it. But hopefully soon. I think that a lot of young people right now are actually really knowledgeable and involved in politics and making changes just in general, not even with politics. So I think that our generation and the younger generations in general are really making a positive change, and I hope that that continues.
I'm gonna kind of go off of that. So in terms of like how being in the younger generation influences my considerations towards the issues, I think absolutely as a younger generation, we are brave because like we have to be brave, like that's all we have, and our futures depend on it. So as a student in the future, I love to use my degree to make a difference. So therefore, like young people, we have to be inclusive and like hopeful if we want to experience the futures that we create for ourselves. So I definitely second Shelby with like thinking about the people that come after us. We have long lives to live, so I'd love to see generations and generations after us.
I think even hopping off of that point that you made, one thing that I notice a lot, kind of like you said, one of the things that our generation and the generations behind us have is a lot of bravery. I mean, if you think about it, we've all been through quite a bit at young ages, like all the housing markets and economic and COVID and all of that stuff happening all at once at such a young age that we kind of have to be like, all right, we're going to toughen up, I guess, and figure it out. But I also think that taught a lot of us to use our voice and to speak up. So I think one really good thing about just what I've noticed being a part of the younger generation is if we see a problem with something or if we want to enact change, even though we don't have the power necessarily to do it, we do have the voice and we do like to gather together and try to enact change in any way possible, whether that's volunteer work, whether that's educating people on what we know and seeking out education from people who know more than we do, or whether that's standing and just screaming until somebody hears us and does something or helps or whatever that may be. I think that's one thing that we have shown that we do as a younger generation, and that I think if we can continue to do that until we have these positions where we can enact greater change, that might be something that's really helpful as well.
All right, so our next question is, do you see topics such as climate change, sustainability, and climate justice as lacking in education? Is there anything that could be improved? And kind of what are the implications of this?
I can kick that off. I definitely think that just environmental education, climate education, everything like that is definitely lacking in our curriculum. As an environmental studies student, obviously most of my classes and courses are related to the environment or climate justice, and I have a minor in human rights and humanitarian affairs, so most of them are related to this topic. But the majority of my friends who aren't environmental studies or aren't related to this, they have never taken an environmental class before. They've never taken a human rights or justice class before. So I think that the education and their knowledge about the topic is definitely lacking. And even in elementary and high schools, I can't speak to Nebraska once again because I did not grow up here, but in Wisconsin, I did not take any really environmental classes. I took one environmental science class as a senior in high school, and I loved it so much I became an environmental studies major. So I definitely think that it would be beneficial to implement this into the curriculum, whether at the younger levels or even in college, just so people are more aware of what is happening with the environment and climate justice. And it also gives them some avenues to, peruse some ideas of how to change things if they wanted to do so, because I do think that a lot of people care. And I think that a lot more would if they knew about it or if they knew of options that they could take to make an impact.
I'm going to kind of second that. So I think obviously like education, it improves as we move up like through education level. So like pre-college, besides like my environmental studies class my senior year, like much like Shelby, I didn't have much exposure to climate injustice issues or sustainability in general. I only really had like 1 or 2 classes where we'd like discuss it, but it'd be more of a debate rather than like a true discussion or like true lesson about what's happening. However, I have noticed that like generations or like age levels, grades below mine, I think that those gaps are definitely starting to get filled of like what I experienced versus what they experience. Just because like the conversation is coming up more, like we see young people posting about it on their stories, or like in Montana, people are suing their states because climate change is impacting or violating their human rights. And as well as like standing up to injustices. So I think education has improved, but it always needs to be improving because obviously times are changing faster than ever with these emerging issues.
Yeah, I would also agree. Throughout most of my primary education, I didn't have a whole lot that I learned about climate change. I mean, we learned a little bit. We learned it was a thing and that it was happening, but there was never really a discussion of, so this is the problem. What's a potential solution that you could think of? And then coming together and talking about it as a group and seeing what your peers think, and having a teacher who's maybe like, okay, so let's actually try some of those solutions in a small scale so that you learn how to do those with a group in a very safe, risk-free environment. And then you can enact those later in your life and teach other people that you know. That's something I think would be really helpful that we didn't necessarily have, at least in St. Louis. Nobody I knew was doing stuff like that. And I'm not sure if it's changed a whole lot there. I don't really keep up on things with them that's going on, but I know even with my younger brother and my younger sister, I don't think they've really gotten to learn a whole lot about it either in their high school education. And while it's amazing, especially with college, it opens up all these doors to different educational opportunities. There are a lot of people who aren't going to have the opportunity to go to college, or maybe it's not a desire for them. So being able to give them those experiences in high school so that a larger population of people know about it, I think would be something that's really important.
Thank you all for those responses. I can definitely relate to feeling and seeing that education is lacking as a student. So shifting now more to food, what do you guys hope to see happen within the decade in regard to sustainably feeding the Nebraska community, or more specifically Lincoln students?
I can start with this one. So personally, I just hope to see like stigma being eliminated. Food is not a privilege, it's a human right. On campus, like through like Husker Pantry statistics, like 1 in 3 students worry about not having enough food until like they get money to purchase more. On campus, that's a lot of students worrying about food. Food insecurity can cause like stress, whether it's money, sleep, everyday functions like going to class. So that's why like the stigma needs to be removed. I don't know, I put like into perspective, like think about a time when you were like hangry, like now imagine like people looking down on you, or like, I don't know, like not giving you the help that you need, or like worse, like no resources being available. Like hunger can cause a lot of stress in everyday life, and stigma just needs to be eliminated so that people can get the help that they need. And then Sammy and I both volunteer at the pantry. She's amazing. I think one thing that the pantry does well is we make like a welcoming environment for students. So just asking what they need, like ask them at their day, just like everyday things, so that it seems like it's an everyday thing to ask for help, because in reality, it is an everyday thing on some scale to ask for help. So.
And kind of jumping off of what you said, Caitlin, I know definitely with the stigma, that's a huge thing that people are really scared to ask for help when it comes to food. I know when I went through it in high school and in undergrad, there probably were resources, but I didn't know what they were because they weren't advertised. And I was too scared to say, hey, I kind of would like to eat some breakfast today. What you got? So I think that's one thing that we've been working really hard at the pantry to do is get out in the community a lot more, get more involved, and really advertise ourselves to people. We have an online ordering system now, so it's very easy to access. You don't have to necessarily worry. I know one fear was like, well, what if I'm in the pantry and someone I know sees me? Well, with the online ordering system, you come in, it takes you 5 seconds to get your food and leave. So it probably feels a bit more comfortable than having to go and shop around and pick out all the stuff you need and as Caitlin said, we are very nice and welcoming. We're not like staring you down while you're picking stuff out, but feeling like, okay, there's a worker in here and I'm trying to like get the food I need and I'm a little shy and don't necessarily want to get everything I need. And it kind of just eases that anxiety, I think, a little bit. So I think in addition to that, increasing the resources that are out there so that more students can have it, or more people in the community who aren't students can also access things like this.
So I do not volunteer at the food pantry, so I cannot really speak to the food pantry itself, but it sounds like a wonderful resource. And I agree that the stigma definitely is an issue, and I hope that changes very soon. Just more in general, kind of talking about what the previous panelists were talking about, I do hope to see more localized forms of food and agriculture just in general, like community gardens, gardening at home, all of that sort of thing. Just making sure that food is coming from nearby. And I know that some people don't have the option of doing that, but if you are able to do so, I think that being a conscious consumer is really important. And I hope that more people pay attention to where their food is coming from, what's in it, what's being used on it. And I also hoped that more people will become open to changing their eating habits or become more educated about the benefits of doing so, especially in regards to climate change. I think it was mentioned before, like meat, for example, it releases so much greenhouse gas emissions. So, I'm personally a vegetarian, but it's not for everybody. So even maybe just reducing your meat consumption just, to a couple times a week, or just trying to eat less in general, just trying to change your eating habits or becoming just a little bit more open to doing so, or becoming more educated about it. I really hope that changes in the coming years. I really do think that it has changed, just especially like across generations recently, but I hope it becomes more prevalent as we continue.
So based on those kinds of responses, what are your thoughts on more reasonable and accessible actions that we can take to direct our current food system toward climate justice? I know, Shelby, you just kind of touched on this, but if anyone has anything to add or.
Yeah, kind of like what I mentioned earlier, like marginalized groups are more impacted by climate change and related issues. So definitely like shaping climate action plans towards specific goals that would help those groups with food access is definitely important. And then other actions in terms of like smaller scale, individual scale, just because it's more reasonable, like it's easier to change yourself or like make changes in your daily routine than like a whole community. Like it starts with one person, kind of that ripple effect. Some of those would be advocating for change, supporting local farmers, eating less meat, one of the more controversial ones, I'm sure. Stuff like that. And then also just like using informal science education to your benefit. Like scientists, like food scientists across the world, they can't reach every single person, but like educating yourself and then reaching out to the groups that you're a part of, like your family, your friends, your classmates, all that type of stuff, it's more likely to like actually leave an impact coming from a peer rather than from like someone talking down, if that makes sense. So just starting within yourself and then moving up, I guess.
I think Caitlin brought up a really good point with saying, yes, starting with yourself and educating yourself, but not just sitting with that knowledge of being like, okay, well, I know what I need to do, but going to your friends and going to your family and giving it to them in a way that's digestible for them, as opposed to, sometimes when people who are scientists in a topic and it's their passion and their life's devotion and they know a lot about it, if you don't know a lot about it, that information can feel a little overwhelming. But if we go out and we educate ourselves and we're like, okay, I know a fair bit, but it's not it's not my superpower by any means, but you know enough to educate in a way that's digestible and in a way that you can break it down for the other people in your lives. And more than just, hey, this is an issue and it's something we have to solve, but kind of like what Caitlin said, like, let's think about what we can all do on a small scale. Like, can we shop local instead of not doing that? What are small little things, one change at a time, that we can make in our own lives? And maybe even having like change buddies that you do it with. So like me and my best friend, we're going to start doing this one thing and it's going to be our new thing for the month. And if we like it, we're going to keep it and we're going to add to it. So making it small and manageable, as opposed to thinking we have to make this huge change right now and it feels overwhelming and impossible.
Yeah, and I would just like to touch on, the climate justice part of that as well. I think that incorporating, different diverse voices and just making sure that everybody is heard is really important. I'm writing my thesis on Indigenous knowledge systems in Lincoln, so I've got to work with a lot of great people. I've been working with Ted Hibbeler, I believe he spoke earlier today. So I think that really implementing, Indigenous knowledge systems and traditional knowledge would also be really beneficial in helping realize climate justice. Indigenous peoples, they existed in harmony with the land for thousands of years. And then we're not really following those principles anymore. And we're, as Ted said, we're poisoning the land, we're poisoning the water, we're making it so it's kind of becoming uninhabitable. And Indigenous peoples, and we've had to change our ways of life because of this. So I think that really incorporating, listening to people, diverse perspectives is really one way that we could help create climate justice, and being open to these different perspectives and voices is also really important, I think.
I really liked those responses. Those were all very well put. I guess within our last couple of minutes, I'll just ask you to share maybe one takeaway that the audience should have after this panel, in your opinion. Anything that we haven't already covered or anything that you want to add to, feel free to add your own takeaway.
So I'm going to cheat here because I have two things that I really want to talk about. So two things that people should definitely take away is like eco-anxiety is a real thing. As some of like the community involvement people touched on earlier, like these issues don't just impact us like physically, but mentally as well. Being involved in like these types of challenges can be so exhausting, so stressful, and they may lead to like symptoms of like anxiety, depression. With these topics not being easy, it's definitely important that we take care of ourselves. Nothing's going to get done if everyone's burnt out, if everyone's exhausted. So make sure to like get sleep, like make sure to take breaks, all that stuff. And then my second thing is find intersections between like the issues in your interests that you already have. So like if you like art, show off your skills there. If you like writing, like write a policy brief or like a story, write a blog. Just unique perspectives and ideas are like the only way that we're going to solve these issues. Like we need perspectives to relate to like different groups of people, and through like expressing our interests, that's how we're going to do it. So that's my thing to leave off with.
Oh, Shelby, where are you going to go?
Go ahead. You go ahead.
I was say really quick, hopping off of what Caitlin said, with it impacting and having a mental impact, don't do it alone. Like if it's something that's overwhelming for you, if it's something that's causing anxiety, there are groups of people. I mean, we're a huge group of people that all have interest in it and want to talk about it. So find a group of people that you can talk about it with. And it doesn't even have to be a formal setting. Go out for coffee and chat about it and think about if it helps you to put a plan in action for yourself. Talk about like small plans you can do or larger plans that you can do. and don't think that you have to try to educate yourself by yourself or make a change completely by yourself, but seek out people who know more than you do and ask them for help. And hey, I really want to learn more about this. What do you know? Can you point me to some resources?
Yeah, so going off what Caitlin and Sammy both said, like eco-anxiety is very real. And I personally think that just going out and doing something kind of helps to combat my eco-anxiety, no matter how small it is. Just taking a small first step, I really think helps me to feel better about it. And like both had mentioned before, you know, it can kind of lead to like the snowball effect. If you start doing it, people around you might start picking up on this habit and just lead to a bigger overall effect. And I guess my last point I wanted to make is I recently had to watch this video for one of my other classes, and it talked about, it was a debate whether regarding humanity's best days are ahead of us or behind us. And I thought that they made a really good point. And they said that, you know, human ingenuity and innovations have been around for as long as we've been alive. And so, you know, what's going to stop us now? Why would we stop now? So that kind of made me feel better about my eco-anxiety, because I definitely have that. Just like, you know, humans are innovators where we always seek to improve what's going on, what's happening in our living situations. So I think as long as we keep seeking to improve the world, you know, for ourselves, for people after us, for everyone who's here, I think that we will be all right. And we have to have hope that it's going to happen.
Thank you guys so much for sharing your perspectives. I think it was refreshing and kind of validating to hear other students discussing these issues and taking a stand and just giving us some suggestions and resources. I think it is very beneficial. Thank you for such a great discussion. I want to extend a final thank you to all of our speakers this evening and to all of you who attended tonight for making this such a successful event. Have a great rest of your night. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Abigail.
Thank you very much.